Pauline Kael, Roger Ebert, Christy Lemire, Alonso Duralde. What do they all have in common? That's correct. Extraordinary film critics. Hello, everyone. This is W, host of the High Art on the Edge page, host of Surprisecast. Last month, I had the incredible good fortune of speaking with Alonso and Christy about the art of film criticism, upcoming holiday movies, and of course, their fantastic show, Breakfast All Day. After the interview was over, I admired the way that they were able to articulate their clear thoughts. And this is very evident in the work that they do as film critics, which is not easy. But most importantly, what I really noticed is quite palpable. Their friendship, the chemistry between the two, the way that they work off each other that provides entertaining and very stimulating conversation. You'll be able to see that on the screen yourself. So grab yourself a good drink, have a seat, and enjoy this really warm and sweet conversation with two people who have a gift for words, Alonso and Christy.
What do you want to discuss now? My favorite color?
You see, George, you really had a wonderful life. Don't you see what a mistake it would be to throw it away?
Cab. Let me make it up to you somehow, huh, please? How about a nice hot dog and a beer?
This is W, host of the High Art on the Edge page, host of this podcast feature called Surprisecast. Today, we have some very special guests inside the Surprisecast studio, Christy Lemire, Alonso Duralde, film critics. You may know them from Breakfast All Day, which we will get into much later in discussion. How are you today?
Terrific. Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us. Good to see you.
Good to see you. And before we launch into our discussion about being a film critic and this podcast and show that you operate, I want to throw a few icebreaker questions your way. Are you ready?
Sure.
Christy, This one is for you. Tell the listeners, what do you wish you could do over again in your life?
Oh, I'd wear sunscreen. Yeah, I would go back and tell like teenage me, 20-something-year-old me, A, to wear sunscreen, B, to stop drinking earlier. I stopped drinking when I was 45. I want to go back and tell young Christy, like, you're not cute. So that's probably part of it. But sunscreen is the key thing. I wish I'd known.
Was that something just was not kind of taught to you as a child?
I grew up in the valley, like hanging out by the pool. My mom would lie out by the pool with like baby oil and just read books and smoke all day. So like that was the example that was set. It was the 70s and the 80s. Like we didn't know. I had a convertible. I drove around with a convertible with no sunscreen on.
We thought the sun was our friend.
We thought the sun was, and it is because it has vitamin D in it, but it also, ravages your face. And so I wish I could go back and tell younger me, when I was feeling frisky and free in my convertible to take a second and put on sunscreen. I'm Irish. I'm pasty.
Thank you for sharing and being slightly vulnerable. Much appreciated. Okay, Alonso, this one is for you.
Shoot.
Okay. Peter Weir, Martin Scorsese, Catherine Bigelow. Those are your three choices. You have an opportunity to go out to lunch with either one of them. Tell us, who would you go out to lunch with? And what might be your very first question you would ask?
You know what? I mean, I think any of them would be fascinating companions to hear their stories. I mean, not that I think he's the best filmmaker of the three, but I would definitely have to go with Scorsese just because I don't know a lot about production, but I know a lot about cinephilia. And so we'd have that in common. First question would probably be, you know what? I know that he is a champion of one of my favorite sort of great, terrible movies, 1968's Boom, starring Liz Taylor and Richard Burton, directed by Joseph Losey. So I'd probably start there and find out what it is he loves about Boom.
That would be a very fascinating conversation. I'd love to be a fly on the wall. Should it ever happen, let us know when.
You'll be the first to know.
All righty. And then we're going to just do one more. Christy, are you ready?
Sure.
My mother, who has been in the private college counseling business for over 25 years, told me that roughly 60% of the students are part of the Greek system at SMU.
Oh, yeah,
Were
it's a big
you
deal.
ever part of the Greek system? And what did yeah.
Very much so. I was a Delta Gamma at SMU, and I was like front and center for all of the Rush songs. Like, I was a really good sorority girl. I am really good at jumping up and down and clapping and singing and smiling at the same time. I wore the DG stuff all the time, buttons, bumper sticker on my car, like anchor keychain. Some of my best girlfriends still are women that I pledged with 35 years ago. So it was a big deal then, and it's still been a source of like lasting, important friendships. Up until this week, we're all texting each other this week during the election. So I loved it, and I'm glad I did it. I look back now and I see on Instagram like how stunningly beautiful the girls are now, and I'm like, they wouldn't have wanted me. Like they're much more polished in a way that I was not, coming in from LA and not knowing a whole lot about it going into it. But I did do it, and I'm really glad I did it.
Any of those valuable life skills that you acquired and attained from being part of that experience, did any of it bleed into your work as a film critic at all?
I'll tell you where it does come up all the time, and Alonso can attest to this as well, is that like going through Rush and on the other side of it, not being the Rushie, but being in the house and like meeting girls, you learn to pick your spots in terms of who you champion. So like during Rush, you chat about everyone you met that day, and people who raise their hand constantly and are in love with everybody, you tend to tune them out and not be able to discern what really matters. I learned then and there to pick your spots. And I've learned that, and I've applied that like in our LA film critics voting. There are some folks who are very vocal and very interested in sharing their opinions on everything. And
Sure.
I am like, you wait, you bide your time. And then when something really matters to you, you speak up, and that's more meaningful. And I've applied that philosophy in a variety of settings. So that's actually a useful skill.
Yeah.
Also, it helps you learn how to get along with people who are totally different from you. And that's what college should do for you in general. But I met women from all over the country, different backgrounds, different religions. And like, I think that is useful too.
Okay. Alonso, you went to Vanderbilt, yeah?
I did.
So any experiences that you want to share about that you feel may apply towards the work that you do as a film critic?
Oh, I'll tell you, my academic performance at Vanderbilt was slipshod at best, but I got access to a really great student paper. So I wrote reviews for them for like 3.5 years. And that really, got a lot of my terrible writing out of my system, I hope, or at least, helped me kind of find a voice and learn the craft of it just by doing it and doing it and doing it. And thankfully, none of that lives on the internet. There was a campus radio station. So, that certainly was great training for all the podcasting that I do now. It really made me comfortable on the mic and sort of showed me how to talk in public and do all that kind of stuff. And I even directed a play when I was in college because I made up a major. It was, a kind of cross, what's it called? Anyway, there's a word for this where you make up a major basically. And there was some literature involved. There was what few film courses I could get at the time. Now they have an actual film school, but at the time they didn't. And I took in the drama department a class in acting and a class in directing so that I could sort of better understand what those people do and have a better idea of how to evaluate what they do. So I directed a play. And in fact, that play starred Kim Dickens, who I will always be proud to be the fact that I was her first director. And she went on to be in like Gone Girl and, Fear the Walking Dead and Treme. Like, she's an extraordinary actress. And I was lucky enough to get to work with her when she was just starting out as a performer, and she was great from the get-go. So Yeah, I was a terrible student, but I took full advantage of the many sort of extra. And I programmed the on-campus cinema. So that showed me, when I went to festivals, I knew about like booking films and talking to distributors and figuring out the calendar and where to put things and how to write blurbs that would make them, attractive to people. Like, how did I sell out, like 4 shows of an Italian art house film to frat guys? I played up the fact that it had been rated X, So yeah, I got a lot out of that experience.
I don't want to go too far off tangent, but because you just shared that experience with me, have you read this book, A Bright Ray of Darkness, written by Ethan Hawke?
I have not. I did not know Mr. Hawke had written a book.
No. But I know he contains multitudes and works across various mediums, so that makes sense. So he wrote a book.
So, Alonso, and for all the listeners, a great book that was written a couple of years ago, and it goes into a play that needs to get done. So check it out. Yeah, it's really good. A Bright Ray of Darkness by Ethan Hawke.
Will do.
Okay, Christy, you don't know this, but inside this room right now is actually a room I spent great deal of time in. This is my childhood room.
Oh, wow.
And my brother and I would play Jaws on the bunk bed. You could not fall on the floor, otherwise you'd be eaten by the shark. So Jaws had a tremendous impact on my upbringing, Halloween, so on and so forth. Tell the listeners, when was that seed planted for you in terms of your love for cinema?
Oh gosh, films have always been there. I've told this story many times. My parents both loved movies and they had really different tastes, and they would share every kind of film with me from a very young age. So we had a Betamax to record things. Shows you how old I am. And we had beta recordings of The Wizard of Oz, The Sound of Music, and we'd watch them over and over and over again. And that was, my earliest memories of film. My mom loved all kinds of, international cinema and art house stuff. And she would drive from our house in Woodland Hills to the video store in Silver Lake, which is 45 minutes away because they had better foreign titles. And this is back when you still had to go to a store and rent movies, long before there was streaming. And then my dad had much more traditional tastes. He loved Humphrey Bogart and John Wayne, and he loved classic musicals. And so between the two of them, I had this really great film education. So I can't remember a time when movies weren't there. I think Alonso and I both share this, that at an early age, we were going by ourselves to movie theaters, and I would make lists of what I wanted to see all summer long. And, I would go at age 12. At age 12, I went and saw The Karate Kid, back to back by myself. I went and saw it, and then I went and ran to the bathroom, and then I snuck in and watched it a second time. And back then you could do that at the UA Warner Center, which no longer exists. And so I can't remember a moment of the seed being planted, but the seed existed from the very beginning.
You have brothers and sisters?
I'm an only child.
Only child. Okay. And because you had that experience, and obviously that has carried and served you well for your career, can you think of, as I mentioned for me, some really seminal films, not just your childhood, it could be as you got older, that really knocked you and just floored you?
When I still had the TV show, I used to co-host a show called Ebert Presents at the Movies, which was Roger Ebert's attempt to reinvigorate the Siskel and Ebert formula with two people who were not him and Gene Siskel. And it failed, as they all did, because none of us could be them. But we did an episode called The Movies That Made Us. And it was, for me, I picked, The Breakfast Club and No Country for Old Men and The Wizard of Oz and Nights of Cabiria, which was my mom's favorite Fellini film, which is still really meaningful to me in a personal way. And I see its influence everywhere. I see it in Anora. And I was so pleased when I did a Q&A with Sean Baker, and he was talking about how Nights of Cabiria and Juliana Messina's performance were huge influences on it. So I'm like, yes, sometimes I feel smart. I know things, but that's a movie that's important to me from my childhood. And so there's a bunch. Yeah, but those are some of them.
No Country for Old Men.
Best Coen Brothers film ever. And I'm a huge Coen fan, but that I think is still their masterpiece.
That could be a whole nother 2-hour podcast. Alonso, we are coming up to the hyper energetic
thing known as the holidays.
Yeah.
Can you tell the listeners some holiday traditions that you experienced whilst growing up that may or may not have included movies?
Well, I'll tell you, I'm unlike Christy. I'm not an only child. I was the youngest of 7, and so the holidays were always great. It was a packed house of people, especially because like I was kind of the change of life baby. So like the sister closest to me is 5 years older than me, but my oldest sister is 13 years older than me. So Christmas often meant people who were off at college or whatever were coming home, and so it was that was always one of my favorite times of year, and we did it up, Movie wise, I grew up in the 70s when It's a Wonderful Life was just always on television, like always. Nowadays when the Turner channels will do their 24 hours of A Christmas Story or Christmas Vacation, they are trying to replicate that moment where It's a Wonderful Life was in the public domain and anybody could show it as many times as they wanted. And so it was just always there. And so that movie singularly was sort of the wallpaper of my childhood. And part of why I have kind of delved into Christmas movie, if you want to call it scholarship, is that I've always loved Christmas. I've always loved movies, and I had so much more to learn about. I liken it to the fact that when I grew up, we had 5 Christmas albums in our house. It was Bing and Dean and like Perry Como and the Boston Pops and Andy Williams. And then, I got older and discovered, Ella Fitzgerald and Pearl Bailey and the Ray Conniff singers and all these other things that were just not part of my media diet. And same applies with movies, I kind of knew about White Christmas, but there's just such a raft of films that have been made over time, whether they are aggressively, Christmas based or just sort of like Christmas inclusive, that were new to me, or that I just sort of wanted to collect under one umbrella of counting them as Christmas movies, even if you don't think that something like The Lion in Winter or Metropolitan qualifies as such. So yeah, I grew up in a household where I loved Christmas because Christmas was great, and I'm a lifelong movie obsessive. So it was inevitable that my chocolate and my peanut butter were going to get together.
You sure like White Christmas. Yeah.
I do. Yes, very much. My husband really turned me onto that one, and it's become, an annual go-to.
Your little podcast on that was fun. I enjoyed listening to it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, Christy.
Yeah.
So I went to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo for college.
Oh, it's so pretty up there.
Yes. And I had a masterful English teacher. He also was the film professor. And he kind of opened my doors. And he turned me on to literature, film criticism, so on and so forth. That's where I really learned about Pauline Kael, the great film critic.
Yeah.
So for you, tell us some film critics that have inspired you along the way.
Well, Roger, of course, because I think what Roger was able to do, he was so brilliant, but he never inflicted it upon you. It was never like he was talking down to you. There was no condescension. There was no showing up how smart he was. He wrote really intelligently and insightfully about film in a way that was accessible. And I am not saying I'm that brilliant, but I think I try to be that clear, and I try to be that accessible in terms of we have to review every kind of movie. We have to know how to review every kind of movie. I think increasingly people specialize, I'm the horror person or I'm the art house person. But having come from the Associated Press, where I worked for 15 years, you've got to be able to write for everybody. And so I try to strive toward that. And Roger was a great example of that. And I enjoyed his writing on so many topics that weren't film. As he lost his ability to speak, he became more prolific back when Twitter was a good place to be. And also on his, on his blog, on the Sun-Times website, everything from alcoholism to atheism. And he wrote a whole book about his rice cooker. So that to me is sort of the shining star, the example of how to connect with your audience.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because actually my film professor wrote a book on the great director Peter Greenaway.
Oh.
And it's called Sex, Death, and Provocation. And what I admire about his writing is exactly what you just said, how to appeal to the academic side of film rhetoric and really connecting to people who appreciate that, but also the mainstream film goer. So with that in mind, how hard is that for you?
I hope I write like I talk. And I hope that the way I write is a conversation. It feels like you're having a conversation with me, which is why it's often so helpful that Alonso and I do what we do, because I like to work through things with him. And then like that makes it easier to get on paper. So, and I also read things to myself. I don't know if you do this, Alonso, but I'll read it to myself out loud before I press the button and send it to my editor. Because you catch little mistakes or words.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
But also just flow.
I do. And thankfully, like Dave White edits everything I write. And so like, that's very helpful to he'll catch stuff that I missed, or he'll be like, I don't understand how you got from here to here, but yeah, no, I'm totally with you on that one. For me, the idea is there is a way to explain what a movie is doing and why you're responding to it, but you can still express your enthusiasm about it in a way that makes somebody think, maybe I'll give that a shot, when it might otherwise just sound too sort of forbidding.
There's a thing that Roger used to say, and I keep invoking him, like approaching a film review, that he's reacting to the film, but he's also reacting to his reaction to it. And that I find is helpful. Like I just had this conversation last week with a dad who also chaperoned this field trip with my son's French class. He's like, what are you looking for when you watch a movie? Do you have like a checklist? And my main thing is like, how does it make me different? How am I different now watching this movie than I was when I walked in? Either emotionally, or like, did it provoke, thoughts in me I wouldn't have had, or just how did it change me anyway? And that's what I take note of. And like, that is helpful in determining whether a movie is effective or not.
So there was a film critic here in the Bay Area who used to come to my classroom and talk to my students about writing and film criticism. One of the things that she talked about is when she was reviewing a film, if it was a film about dogs, she would incorporate dog language and pepper her writing that way. That was her approach, and it was effective and it was engaging. So for you, what are some of your motifs? What are some of your strategies in writing?
Well, Dave White would tell you that I have a weakness for puns and I need to knock it off. And
it won Justin Chang a Pulitzer, so you keep doing that.
I don't know if that's what won him the Pulitzer, but it didn't get in the way in any event. Yeah, I don't know that that's quite my motif. I think I'm usually more interested in, I don't know. I don't believe in sort of pronouncements about things, because I kind of take each review on a case by case basis. I think. Yeah. I mean, it becomes a thing of like, what does this movie think it's doing? What is this movie like? We do numbers on Breakfast All Day, which neither of us particularly like doing, but it's just a thing we're sort of stuck with at this point. and sometimes you'll get these like, rotisserie baseball statisticians who are like, oh, well, you gave this movie a 7.6 and that other one a 7.1 and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, I think that each movie has to be kind of, you're judging it on its own scale. You can't walk into Killers of the Flower Moon and rate it the same as when you're walking into Hundreds of Beavers. Like, they are different kinds of movies. They have different agendas and they're trying to accomplish different things, and they succeed at those things. But, I think you just have to sort of like, always be adjusting the scale for a film's intent and for a film's, chosen kind of pathway. It's tone, it's, all of that stuff. So that's what I try to do, and that, and sort of, when possible, and it's not always a thing that immediately exposes itself, but to explore the idea of like, why this movie now? What is it saying now? Why does it exist at this particular moment in the culture? And what is it conveying or failing to convey about, the zeitgeist, about right now?
I like that. And also, I think something that you and I talk about quite a bit is like, how well does this movie achieve what it sets out to do?
Exactly.
Right? Like, what's its target and how close does it come to hitting it?
Yeah.
And that's a sign of success, I think, for us both.
Yeah.
Okay. So with regards to a Scorsese film, and you've seen many of them, when you watch another Scorsese film, does your criteria change based on each Scorsese film that you watch? Is it different from just watching another film? Do you know what I'm saying? Like when you watch Killers of a Flower Moon, do you look at his body of work and go, okay, where does this stand in relation to his other pieces of work? Or do you just keep it compartmentalized and separate?
It's impossible not to when someone's that prolific.
Certainly, yeah. And I think when somebody has such a definitive voice, you can't watch The Irishman and not think about like Goodfellas or Casino or sort of other movies that he has made about like, power structures or about, men or about like, these things, he is an auteur in the truest sense in terms of like having this kind of body of work that speaks to things in a particular way. And that doesn't mean that, you complain that the silence isn't enough, like, Mean Streets, but you understand that it is coming from this one place and from all of the things that this artist contains and is interested in.
I want more whip pans and silence. more 50s doo-wop needle drops.
Exactly.
Christy, so for you, if someone came up to you and said, what is the art of film criticism? Obviously a very subjective term. How would you define it to that person?
Gosh, that's so hard. I mean, I think we touched on it a little bit as far as like having the conversation about how effectively, a film achieves its goals. I feel like people's time and money is valuable. Time and money are valuable. And, I want to help steer folks in the right direction. But I don't feel like what I say is the definitive be all end all. I feel like it's the beginning of a conversation, and I feel privileged to be the one to start it.
Yeah, somebody responded to one of my reviews recently on social media and said, I can't believe we saw the same film. And I responded, no two people ever see the same film.
That's art. That's what art should do. Exactly.
Because people talk about, I've actually heard like young people who should think about this more complain about reviews that aren't objective enough or that are too biased. And it's like, no. All criticism is super subjective. Everything that you were taking in runs through the filter of your life experiences, your own like preferences, your favorite color, whatever it is. Like all of that stuff comes into play. So yeah, no two people ever see the same movie or the same painting or the same opera or whatever. And so film criticism is the idea, I think, of explaining, here's what I saw. And here's how I saw it, and here's how it made me feel, and maybe here's a little bit of why it made me feel that way. And then people can read that and decide for themselves, well, this is not my point of view at all, so my experience watching this film will probably be completely different, or was completely different, or, I can relate to that, and I also respond to these things, so I will perhaps also respond to it in this case. So yeah, I think it is very much a personal thing that you are then sharing with the world.
Something I think is so flummoxing, sorry to cut you off, I want to back on that, is that people will often seek out film critics or film reviews that either validate their expectation of the film or validate their own personal experience. And so people will say like, I usually agree with you, but, or, I was disappointed that you didn't like this. I really wanted to like it. And, like The Dark Knight Rises, for example, like I got death threats because people didn't like my review. It's stupid. But like, that's not what film criticism should be. Like, It's so personal. It's so subjective. And I personally always seek out people who disagree with me. Like if Tim Grierson or Katie Walsh or any of our good friends we've had on the show have like a totally different opinion, like that's who I'll click on first, because I want to know, okay, this person's really smart and they're really thoughtful. And what did they see that I didn't see? Exactly. Yeah. And I want that information versus like, everyone agrees with me. I feel smug.
Yeah, and even worse, like you said, people get mad about reviews that don't hew to their expectations based on having seen the trailer. Like they haven't even seen the movie yet, and they've already decided how they feel about it, and they're mad when you don't agree with that.
So I had a friend that stopped going to see Clint Eastwood movies based on his political leanings and stance. And I said, I respect that. That's fine. I think you're missing out on some good film, but that's your choice. So how do you as a film critic keep away some of the biases that you may know about these directors that you don't really care for, whatever social activism, political stuff? Like, how do you balance personal opinions and biases? Do you know what I'm saying?
What a fun week to ask that question. I'll let you take this one first.
Well, look, I think that we my ongoing thing is like, I don't like to watch trailers. I like to go into a movie as clean as possible. Like, I love seeing a film at a festival where I don't even know what the plot is, and come upon along the way. And generally speaking, I think it's harder and harder to go into a movie with that kind of stuff because we're bombarded with more information than we ever wanted to know, whether it's the trailer, whether it's about the personal lives of the stars or the political leanings of the filmmaker or whatever. I walk into every movie hoping that I'm going to be delighted or provoked or something. There's this ongoing thing of like, oh, critics hate movies. Like, no, we love movies. That's why we see so many of them, and that's why we're so disappointed when they let us down. So, like, I've had to review Roman Polanski movies in the last couple of years, like Out of Venice, or I have certainly talked about Eastwood movies, and I try to sort of like back burner that stuff as much as possible and sort of like take the film on its own level. But at the same time, I think that anything, again, it's sort of like with Scorsese, about his interest in like, music or Catholicism or whatever, and how that colors, his work. I made the joke when we reviewed Juror Number 2 that you could put it alongside Richard Jewell and Sully in the White Men Can't Get a Break trilogy from Clint Eastwood, and so that stuff plays into it, but that's just one of the colors in the paint box that he's working with. And so I think it's fair to acknowledge it, but I think it's also, you have to not let it overwhelm your entire take on a film and just sort of like accept it for what it is on its own level. But but that's going to be there. That's going to be in the background, and it may or may not manifest itself in the film. The Polanski movie I saw was about like the Dreyfus affair. It's like, oh, you're making a movie about a wrongly accused person. Fascinating. So it's gonna play in, and you just can't help that.
But I feel like, I'll speak for myself, like, I didn't think it all about Clint Eastwood's political leanings when I watched Juror Number 2. Like, that was just an entertaining as hell movie and like a solidly crafted movie from a veteran, efficient filmmaker. Yeah. And I didn't think about him talking to an empty chair at the Republican National Convention.
Okay, got it. So I recently watched your review on Terrifier 3. I will not watch that movie for a variety of reasons. But I imagine myself, if this were my job, and perhaps I have to watch this and push it out my review, boy, that would be hard. Now, I saw your reactions to this film, both of yours, is very clear. So when you're going into a film that you go, holy crap, this is just too much. What do? I mean, do you close like Alonso? You were closing your eye half the time.
Yeah, I spent much of Terrifier 3 like this. I mean, like, it depends. Like, I think in the case of Terrifier 3, I knew that like Dave was going to sit in on that one, and that Christy was going to watch it, and it was going to be a conversation. And so, like, if I just didn't look at a lot of it, that would be okay. If I were like going to write a review of it for the Film Verdict or somebody, then yes, it would be my due diligence to actually like watch the whole thing and get through it. But sometimes I'm a squirmer. I'm not a horror guy, and so like people have told me they enjoy sitting next to me in horror movies because I'm responding so much.
You're the entertainment.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, you just it's the job. It's the job.
Christy, what about you?
There's stuff. I mean, I'm a mom, so like anything with like kids in peril, especially like young boys in peril. I've got a 14-year-old. Well, actually, he's 15 now. 15-year-old son. That's hard. Anything with a dog, I'll sob. Like, just the idea of a Lassie movie like makes me want to cry, or like anything like that. So it's hard. But I guess if the film is doing what it does well and does it effectively, then that emotion is earned.
With Terrifier 3. And again, I've heard so much about it. My brother loves that whole series. With movies like that, so hardcore, are there films that you may have watched on that kind of level of just that grindhouse that you actually really enjoyed?
We enjoyed Terrifier 3. We had fun because it's so over the top.
Yeah.
Right? So knowingly, like, it's almost funny. Like, it's silly. Like, Art the Clown's kind of a comedic figure.
Yeah.
Like I'm a big fan of Basket Case, which, has a print in the Museum of Modern Art. And I think was very recently, I think the Substance actually like tips its hat to Basket Case on more than one occasion, Yeah, I'm not a snob about that stuff. I think there's a lot of there are critics who sort of defend the idea of like, irresponsible movies or, kind of films that just go so far beyond the pale. And I mean, there's something to be said for really kind of throwing out the blocks of what people are and aren't supposed to do. I mean, going all the way back to like un chien andalou, like I think that cinema often relies upon its provocators to sort of like create a path to what becomes sort of standard issue storytelling, but in its moment just seems like tremendously shocking, So yeah, I'm not priggish about it. It's just not the kind of movie I'm going to run out to see necessarily.
Sure.
But did anybody ever actually go and like slice out their own eyeball after seeing Un Chien Andalou? Like,
yeah, I don't know, but I'm sure somebody complained that it was going to inspire somebody to do it.
You know what? I co-hosted a screening of the first Fast and the Furious movie at the Frida very recently with Larry Mantle and Film Week, and Amy Nicholson and I were on stage with a couple of the behind the scenes folks, and people came to that screening who had lost loved ones in street racing. And they came to complain about the fact that they felt that the Fast and the Furious movies really glamorized a very violent activity.
Wow.
And my argument is like, it's not the job of art to be moralistic, like this is telling a story which happens to be set in the street racing world. Yes, some parts of it are exciting, but you also see the consequences of it. And it's not telling you to go out there and also block off a quarter mile of a street in the valley or wherever. It's, you do with that information what you will when you walk out the doors.
Depiction does not necessarily equal endorsement.
Thank you. Yes.
Nice. Can we talk about Breakfast All Day?
Please.
First question I have for you. How does this differ from What the Flick?
Okay, well, let me tell a story of how we started this thing.
Please.
All right. So What the Flick was a channel that Cenk Uygur spun off of the Young Turks. He had a whole network of channels with different topics. Young Turks was a progressive political channel, but then he also wanted a place to share his terrible opinions on movies. And that was What the Flick. And so Alonso and I were part of that. That lasted for about 8 years. And then in late August of 2018, they decided that they were focusing more on like going back to their bread and butter of political coverage. They had like a sports channel and a pop culture channel, and they got rid of all of those and just like financially needed to focus. And so it was like Monday, August 26th. And that following Thursday, we were at my dining room table with this very podcast equipment that you see here. We were doing it as a podcast. So we just sort of figured it out. Like we just kept doing what we wanted to do, and we've been fine tuning it all along. I've always wanted it to feel, and I won't speak for Alonso with this, but my intention has always been like, this is a conversation that we would be having walking out of the theater, and you just happen to be there with us watching it. And I've always wanted it to feel organic. We truly are very good friends. And so like we would always sit together anyway. And so this is just us recording what would probably be the conversation we would have afterward anyway. And so we just try to get to a wide variety of films. Some channels focus on, just horror or just like Marvel stuff or just art house stuff. And I feel like it's our mandate and my interest, at least, in doing every kind of film.
Yeah.
So we will do a lot of documentaries and we'll do a lot of foreign language films, but of course we will also get to like Gladiator 2 tonight, for example. So that's my goal with it. And I've been really proud of the community that we built. We've got really lovely, engaged folks, and they've been with us for a long time and they feel like friends. And I'm really proud of our little community.
Alonso, you want to share anything?
Yeah, I'd say all of that is true. I mean, and also the thing about Young Turks or about What the Flick was, it didn't belong to us. We were sort of hired guns, and we came in and we did a show and somebody else produced it. And, like we had some say like, hey, we're going to review these things, but, this is our baby. And so like, for better or worse, if you love it or you hate it, it's just us, there's nobody else for us to pin it on. But I think that also gives us a freedom to talk about stuff that might just the kind of movies like smaller releases or art house or indie or whatever that they might have been like, yeah, no, we're not going to get enough clicks for that, or that's not really the thing that we're interested in. So yeah, I think as film critics in general, we have grown accustomed to the idea of having to become our own bosses. This is not the era where you get a cushy newspaper job and it lasts you for decades, or you're right for this magazine and you stay there. Like, everybody is a freelancer, with very few exceptions. People are putting together their own gigs, and they're starting their own podcasts, or they're doing their Substack or whatever it is, because, the media that once existed as a platform for film critics isn't there anymore. So I'm really proud of what we've built over the years, not just for our sort of public facing YouTube and podcast stuff, but also we have a really great Patreon page, and we do a lot more TV there, and we do some older films and a lot of other fun things that people who are into the show and want more of it can come get.
Christy, what do you really admire about Alonso in his film? What do you?
He's so freaking smart. He's so smart, and he is so encyclopedic, and he has seen so many movies over the years and has a really, really deep wealth of knowledge about like classic film and queer film and of course Christmas movies, but like so many different kinds of movies. And I just learn something from him every single time we talk.
Alonso?
Well, I think that, Christy is being modest about her comparisons to Ebert. I mean, yes, maybe none of us are quite him, but I think that she does share that skill of taking something that might seem like, a really long documentary or a really dark foreign film and explaining it in a way that anybody who's remotely interested in film could be like, oh, I do want to see that. Actually, that does sound interesting. Like, she has that way of taking this thing that can be very academic and very sort of, off-putting for people, and really kind of, sharing that enthusiasm and sharing that the reasons why, hey, there's something in this for you, and I think that she's such a great writer and has such a deep background herself on film, that I think that she's able to put those pieces together for people and does a better job than I ever can of sort of convincing somebody, hey, you want to see this.
Oh, that's sweet. Thanks, honey.
Thank you.
I would concur on both of your compliments towards each other, which is why I've been a longtime fan and viewer and really kind of appreciator the spoken word for film lit criticism, because it's not easy, obviously, to convey these thoughts in a succinct manner and articulate in a way that gets people to start talking about whatever film you're reviewing. So both of you done a tremendous job on that craft. You're welcome. Okay, so a couple more questions with regards to Breakfast All Day. Christy, with the prep work that is involved with this show, give us a little bit of a lens into that world.
Oh, well, we go see the movies. We plan like a month out as far as like what are we going to do every Tuesday, every Friday, and then what Patreon are we going to get to on each of those days. And then we also do a thing called Lunch Date with our Patreon members at our highest Patreon level, where we meet and do like a live chat once a month. And so we we're constantly talking. We text every single day at some point in time during the day as far as like, have you seen this? Have you gotten the information for this? When is this screening? When can we get links? So we're constantly in conversation with each other about that. And then Tuesdays and Fridays, we meet up and we do a couple of reviews and we do live streams on Fridays. And I kind of love that. Like, I would be a terrible investigative journalist. Like, I'd be really bad at the long game required for that. But like, I like the week in, week out. Okay, we're doing this today. We're doing this tomorrow. We're doing this. And we do it and get in and get out and be done. And then I whip up the videos and the podcast and I put it out to the world. And Alonso helps promote it.
And Alonso, anything else you want to share in terms of the prep work?
Yeah, no, I think it's actually, I think, really kind of anchors my week to know that like Tuesdays and Fridays are definitely going to be like, doing the Breakfast All Day stuff. And, not that things don't also bop into weird places. Like if we have a particularly full Friday coming up, we'll maybe meet on Thursday and knock out a couple of things early. We do a thing called Table for One, where somebody will pay us to review a movie with them, and they'll pick the film and they get to keep the video and the audio to do with it whatever they please. They can put it on their YouTube channel. They can show it to friends. They can bury it in a hole, whatever. And so all of that sort of gets put into the calendar as well. But yeah, it's, I think the film critics with a select few don't have to deal with this if they just talk about like older material or whatever. But if you are trying to keep up with the current cinema, week in, week out, here's what's opening Friday, here's what's opening Friday, here's what's opening Friday, here's what's opening Wednesday, and so you're just trying to like make sense of that and drop things and review things, when you can at the time that works for it.
We're going to wrap this conversation up with Christy and Alonso. I want to know, and I'm sure the listeners want to know, whatever you want to speak to with this next question. Can you share some holiday and or hopeful Oscar picks coming up?
You go first, holiday man.
I'll tell you, there are 3 holiday movies coming out this month that I had varying degrees of expectation for, and all of them wound up being better than I thought they would be. The Best Christmas Pageant Ever, which we have reviewed, which I worried was going to be like, faith-based in the worst kind of way, where it's like just sort of spoon feeding you like super obvious messaging about the true meaning of Christmas. They actually do it in a very delicate and funny way, in the way that the original source material does. Red One, which had a lot of earmarks of being another one of those Red Notice movies, where they get a bunch of movie stars in front of green screens and it's not funny and it's not exciting, is actually pretty fun as an action movie goes and has some wit to it. And then Christmas Eve in Miller's Point, which premiered this year at the Directors Fortnight in Cannes, from Tyler Taormina, a beautiful movie about family get together in Long Island in the early 2000s. And it's one of those movies where not a lot of plot is happening. And if you try and sort of figure out who all the characters are and how they're related to each other, it doesn't really matter. It's a movie that is all about the feeling. It's all about the vibes, if you will, about what that kind of Christmas is like, and the people who sort of when the kids sneak off and do their own thing, or some of the adults go outside and have a smoke and have some real talk about whatever. I loved it. I found it really just emotionally overwhelming, and I can't wait to see it again.
Christy.
Yes. So what I'm looking forward to that I haven't seen yet, is that the question?
You could do that or holiday movies.
Or Oscar picks.
Okay. So I can imagine a world in which like Anora and The Substance do very, very well awards wise. I would have thought before that The Substance would be too weird, but then like Poor Things was hugely successful last award season. So I think the awards voters are getting younger and hipper and more open-minded, and their choices reflect that. I have not yet seen Baby Girl, which I'm very much looking forward to, which I know Alonso loved. I'm looking forward to Queer, the new Luca Guadagnino film starring Daniel Craig, because I'm a fan of both of them. And I'm looking forward to the Timothée Chalamet, Bob Dylan movie from James Mangold, because I love Walk Hard so much, and I'm a sucker for music biopics, but like
Walk the Line.
Right, Walk the Line. Well, and all that
and Walk
too.
Hard.
All of the above. But like James Mangold did Walk the Line, and I think Timothée Chalamet makes such interesting choices that he's good casting to play Bob Dylan. So it looks kind of like a more traditional kind of awardsy movie, but I'm curious to see how they pull it off.
Holiday film. I would say, if I learned this from Roger Ebert, I think he spoke about Planes, Trains, and Automobiles in one of his books as being one of the greatest holiday films, or maybe it was comedy or buddy films like that.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a traditional holiday film you watch every year, whether it be Elf or Christmas Story?
For me, no, but for Alonso, I know there's got to be one.
Yeah, I have a ton.
I know White Christmas is a big one.
White Christmas, definitely. We try to go see It's a Wonderful Life in a theater, which LA offers a lot of opportunities for that every year. We pretty much watch Desk Set every year, which is a Katharine Hepburn, Spencer Tracy comedy that has a big chunk of it that's set at Christmas. I'm a big fan of, the musical Scrooge with Albert Finney from 1970. Yeah, I mean, Remember the Night. The list goes on and on. This is the path I've chosen for myself.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else you want to share with the viewers, listeners about Breakfast All Day?
Patreon.com/BeFestAllDay.
Yeah, we are Breakfast All Day on YouTube and all the places where you find your podcasts. And then I have a newsletter which wraps up all the things we do. Alonso alluded to the fact that we're all kind of freelancers. Like, I like to say that I have 6 jobs and I have no job, but everything I do is at my newsletter, which is called Saturday Matinee. You can subscribe to that at ChristyLemire.com, and you get goodies there that you don't get elsewhere. And then Alonso's got a new book out.
Yes, Hollywood Pride came out earlier this year. Makes a great gift. It's a history of LGBTQ plus Hollywood on screen and off. It's a book, it's an ebook, it's an audiobook, and it's available wherever you get those things, including your local library. Support your local library. And you can follow us on the socials at BeFast All Day on Blue Sky and Instagram and Facebook.
Rapid fire questions. Here we go. Christy, Taylor Swift or Beyonce?
I don't want to have to live in a world where I have to choose.
Alonso, last time you had sushi.
Wow. Before the pandemic.
Christy, coffee or tea?
Both, actually. This is tea right now, but I had coffee earlier.
Alonso, last film you saw at home.
Oh, this odd Leo McCarey comedy called Good Sam with Gary Cooper and Ann Sheridan.
Christy, have you read this book? Surely You Can't Be Serious, The True Story of Airplane.
No, but I have done Q&A with the Zuckers, so I am familiar with it. Yes. I love Airplane.
Alonso, last time you've been up to the Bay Area.
Whew. Does Mendocino count? I was there.
Well, that's a little north, but we'll find it.
I went to Mendocino for the film festival in May, and it was beautiful and just stunning coastline. And it's a great festival. You should check it out.
Christy, tell us one place you love to visit for some relaxation.
We go to Montreal pretty much every summer. I love Montreal in the summer because it just comes alive because it's so cold and dreary in the winter that like everyone's out in the streets and you can sit outside and get something to eat or drink. And there's always little festivals. There's a comedy festival that happens there every year. There's always little concerts and just weird street art. And I love to go hike up to the top of Park Mont Royal. So we love Montreal.
Alonso, tell the listeners the name of a fruit that you find very ugly.
I think star fruit, it looks weird until you slice it.
All right, Christy, last one. Here we go. Yeah. If you were to open up your own restaurant, what style of food, type of food would it be?
I'm a tiny person, so I think I'd want tiny little bites on the go. So like whatever my version is of tapas or dim sum, something like that.
There you go. Thank you both for being part of Surprise Cast. Much appreciated. And
thank you.
You're giving me some great homework and the listeners as far as some films to watch, and really excited about the holiday season and the Oscar buzz and this Beaver movie. What the hell is this Beaver movie? When does this get released?
It's been out. In fact, it is currently on Tubi and Hoopla. You can watch it there. And they're going to be doing some one-off dates in December, putting it back in theaters. So they're actually running an awards campaign for it, which I'm really excited about.
Very good. My name is W, also known as William, host of the High Art on the Edge page, host of this podcast feature called Surprise Cast. And remember, great film is all around us. You just have to keep your eyes open. Ciao.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Welcome.